Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be telling you all about my reading statistics and resolutions from 2018 and looking forward into 2019 with my new reading goals. That's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm just going to get straight into it. So in 2018, I read 39,960 pages across 155 books. I really wish I'd looked at this on like the last day of the year or something, because 40 pages I totally would have read like a little like Penguin Mini Modern or something, or a poetry collection, so I could get up to 40,000, but I wasn't paying attention to that, and page number isn't something that I ever really pay attention to. I read 155 books. As I said, this is more books than I've ever read in a year previously, and I did a full video a couple weeks ago on how I read so much, so if you want to learn more about any little tips I've got for increasing the quantity of your reading, then I will leave that video linked down below in the description. But as I said, 155 books is more books than I'd ever read in a year before, which was really quite standout for me. And I will have a disclaimer there in saying that I took a couple months off from work over the summer for health reasons, and I was able to do a lot of reading during that time, so that goes some way to explain why I read such a high quantity of books. I also read a lot of poetry and children's picture books as well, which I will talk about later, and obviously those shorter books help there being a large quantity of books that I read. So I surpassed my Goodreads goal of 100 books, and I'm going to keep my Goodreads goal at 100 books for 2019. Reading 100 books in a year isn't something that I've struggled with for the past few years. It's not something that puts any level of pressure on me, so I'm just going to keep my Goodreads goal at 100 books. If you are interested, the longest book I read this year was A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin, and the shortest book I read was The Arrangements, which is a short story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Looking a bit more closely at the page numbers of books I read, I don't track these specific page numbers, but rather within a range. So I read 26 books that were under 100 pages, 24 books between 100 and 199 pages, 32 books that were between 200 and 299 pages, 56 books that were between 300 and 399 pages, 13 books between 400 and 499 pages, and 4 books that were over 500 pages. That's pretty in line with what the page numbers I've picked up in the past, in previous years where I've recorded my stats. The 300 to 399 range is really my sweet spot for novels. As for the format of books I read, 51 books were read digitally, so ebooks, audiobooks, and 104 physical books, and I'm really happy with that because I really want to make an effort to tackle my physical TBR. More on that in a minute. To break down where those books came from a little bit more, 25 of the digital books I read were e-arcs that were sent to me on NetGalley. 13 of them were ebooks that I'd bought for myself. As for the physical books, 8 of those were books that had been sent to me by publishers, and 92 of those books were books that I'd either bought for myself or books that were bought for me as like gifts. There were also 17 books that I borrowed, so they can be either from the library or from friends, and that is a mixture of physical books and also digital books, and that will contain all of the audiobooks that I read as well, because I borrow those from my library. Looking at the gender split of authors that I read from, I read 111 books by female authors, 39 books by male authors, and 3 books that were anthologies with contributors of different genders. I think that's actually more male authors than I've read in the past couple years, but that's probably just because there's a higher quantity of books that I've been reading. Unfortunately, in 2018, I read 122 books by white authors and only 30 books by BAME authors. And then there was 3 books that again had mixed contributors. Okay, so for the past few years, I've kept banging on about how I need to change that ratio and read more books by authors of colour. But just sort of saying that and trying to do it without having an actual method of making that happen hasn't worked. I thought about having a specific shelf on my Goodreads, or actually having an actual physical shelf with authors of colour on it, but I felt like that would lead to a little bit of tokenism. Like, oh, I've got to read like however many authors of colour a month, and I don't know, that something about that didn't quite sit right with me. But if that's what I have to do in order to make that happen, is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't know. Something that I have decided to do is that all of the books that I borrow from the library are going to be by authors of colour, and all of the audiobooks that I read are going to be by authors of colour, and that includes borrowing books, audiobooks from the library, but also any subscription services that I use to get audiobooks. I'm only going to be listening to books by authors of colour, and hopefully having that designated thing will actually help me raise the quantity of BAME authors that I read. As for book types, so like plays, poetry, novels, nonfiction, that kind of thing, I had set myself a goal of reading at least one short story collection per month and one classic per month. I'll get onto the classics in a second, but the short story collection didn't work, and I only read 9 short story collections in 2018, which is a shame. This goal had worked really well the year previously when I tried it out with non-fiction books and poetry, and I decided that wasn't something that I needed to consciously carry into 2018 because those two things had been like seamlessly integrated into my reading, and that shows looking at these statistics because I read 21 non-fiction books and 21 poetry collections. That is a coincidence that they're the same number. So I've decided to keep it up and try and give that a go in 2019, see if I can do it again. This year I also read 11 graphic novels or picture books. I only read 2 plays, which is a shame, and maybe I'm not going to put a specific goal on that, but I would just like to read more than 2 in 2019. And the bulk of my reading was made up by 91 novels. I read an average of 12.9, so basically 13 books per month, with the largest quantity of books being read in July when I read 19 books. That's when I took some time off work for health reasons, and the lowest quantity of books I read was in October when I read 7 books. I guess that's just because I was really busy with university then. I mentioned a moment ago that I wanted to read at least one classic a month, and that is something that I did achieve, and I was really surprised when I realized that I had. In fact, I surpassed that and I read 16 classics. I count classics as anything published prior to 1945. I know a lot of people classify like 1900 to 1945 as modern classics, but I keep it all in together. That's something I would still like to keep as a goal in 2019 because even though I achieved that, I don't think it's seamlessly integrated into my reading yet. And to look more closely at those publication dates, this has been implied already with me talking about classics, but I'm talking about when the text was originally published, not the particular edition that I was reading from. But I read 22 books that were released in 2018, 25 from 2017, 16 from 2016, 57 from 2000 to 2015, 19 between 1945 and 1999, 3 books published between 1900 and 1944, 11 books in the 19th century, 1 in the 18th century, and 1 in the 17th century, and nothing earlier than that. I'm quite happy with that. I really enjoy reading backlisted books, so I'm glad I was taking a lot of the books that had been published in the early 2000s off my TBR. I'm really happy with that. So they are all the stats. I want to talk more about some goals and achievements that I had related to reading. One of the things that I've been doing over the past couple years as a quite long-term goal is to complete reading all of Jane Austen's novels, and I did that in December. The last one I read was Mansfield Park. I'm really pleased that I've managed to achieve that, and it never felt like a pressure. Like I did have to consciously say, no, Leanne, you have to finish Mansfield Park before the end of the year, but that didn't feel pressured in any way. Like, it was an enjoyable goal, and now I am looking for another classic author to do that challenge with again. And I have gone through a few options, and I did want it to be a classic author, someone who I'd read a couple of books from before, but who still had a significant body of work that I hadn't experienced yet, someone who I already owned a couple of their books. And the obvious choice for me was George Eliot. She wrote Middlemarch, which is one of my favourite classics, so I am going to be doing this goal with her books. in the next few years. It's quite a long-term goal. One of my big goals for 2018 was a series I did on this channel called What the Hell Happened to My Hauls. I did a full video reflecting on having that as a year-long reading experience, and I will leave that linked down below as well. This was a really great motivational challenge for me to read some of the books that had been on my TBR for quite a few years, but it's not something that I want to carry on doing in 2019 because I found it quite restrictive, and it meant that I wasn't reading books that I had recently bought. However, I really enjoyed those videos, and I think what I'm going to replace it with is just your standard monthly TBR. I haven't done one in January, but I think I would like to do one for the remaining months of the year. I don't want it to be a strict TBR because I still want to do mood reading for this year. Maybe I'll just tell you guys about what short story collection I'd like to prioritize that month, what classic I'd like to prioritize that month, and also something that I want to do is I want to do kind of like a tops and bottoms thing. So every month I want to read a book that has been on my TBR for the longest, and I will do a full video on like the 12 books that have been on my TBR for the longest time with a better title than that. And then I also want to read my newest acquisition that month as well, and I've been thinking about doing something like a random number generator as well each month. Select a book, I don't know. Yeah, so I've decided to start doing TBR videos, but they're not going to be strict TBRs. Something I'm doing in 2019 that I've never done before is that I'm going to make sure all of my reading is chronicled on Instagram. If you want to keep up with my reading between videos, then Instagram is the place to go, and it is always linked down below in the description. But I want to have like an Instagram highlights from my Instagram stories of every single book that I've read this year. So far I've managed to do that. Admittedly, it's only like 3 books so far, but I would really like to keep that up for the remainder of the year. So at the end of the year, I have this highlight of everything that I've read. As I mentioned briefly, I do really want to tackle my physical TBR. It is ridiculous. At the start of the year, my physical TBR was at 170 books. By the end of 2019, I would like it to be under 85 books. Now that seems completely manageable when you consider the fact that I find it very easy to read over 100 books in a year, but I'm gonna acquire books, ain't I? Like, I just am, and I'm not going on a book buying ban. I think ultimately if it was under 100 books by the end of the year, I would be happy, but my like ambitious goal is under 85. In my 2018 goals video, I mentioned that I wanted to host a readathon, and I did that. Me and a few of my friends hosted the Irish Readathon in March, and I am so happy to say that it is going to be running again in 2019, so keep your eyes peeled for that. I literally had the best time. It was so fun. As for like channel goals, I don't really have any. It would be nice to reach 2,000 subscribers. That would be cool after all this time. But that's like whatever. The only other bookish related goal I have, I guess, is to complete my masters, do well in my masters. If you don't know, I'm doing a masters in publishing, and I will do the video about my first semester doing that. I'll do it soon, okay? And I would like to get a job in publishing. That would be nice, wouldn't it? We'll see about all that kind of stuff. I think that's everything. I think that's all of my goals and resolutions. I'm going to try to be very chilled about all of them. And I think I am going to be pretty chilled about them. The only one where I'm going to be like, I'm going to be telling myself off if I don't do it is the one about reading more BAME authors. Like, I'm going to check in with myself regularly about that one, and if I'm not doing it, then I won't be happy with myself, and I'm going to do something about it. But yeah, that's all I'm going to talk about today. Let me know down below if you have any reading resolutions for 2019. Do you like to set yourself specific goals, or are you very relaxed about it? I love hearing about people's different like methods of reading and how they approach reading. It's all fascinating to me. So yeah, if you have any thoughts about anything I've said, do leave a comment down below and we can have a little chat. Anyways, that's all from me today, and I will talk to you guys in my next video.